The wooden platform groaned under the weight of heat, dust, and fear. The sun hammered down on Dry Creek's auction yard, turning the air thick enough to choke. Men crowded close, boots scraping, breath sour, voices rising like a pack of wolves circling wounded prey. On the platform stood a young woman in torn gray cloth, her wrists bound in iron that had rubbed her skin raw. She was barely 19, pale from exhaustion, thin from hunger, but her chin was lifted like she'd swallowed fire. Her name was Seraphine Cole, though no one here cared enough to ask. A fly crawled across her cheek. She didn't flinch. A gust of wind kicked dust across her bare feet, stinging like needles. Still, she didn't look down. She looked past the men, past the noise, past the filth, toward the distant ridge where mountains burned gold under the sun. Like she was reminding herself that freedom existed somewhere. "Last lot of the day," the auctioneer barked, slapping the board beside her. "Strong girl. Virgin. Good for field work, or whatever else you fine gentlemen need." Laughter oozed through the crowd. Seraphine's breath hitched, but her gaze stayed steady. Her heartbeat thudded like a drum in her ears, but she refused to bow. She would not break. Not here. Not for them. A man with missing teeth grabbed his friend and whispered something filthy. Another spat tobacco juice, so close it nearly hit her ankle. A third pulled at his belt like he was already imagining her chained in his yard. "Starting at 50, the auctioneer shouted. 50, barked a large man with grease on his vest. 70, called another, eyes roaming her body like a butcher choosing meat. 100, someone yelled. The bids climbed. The crowd pressed closer. The laughter grew uglier. Seraphine stared at the horizon, her jaw locked so tight it ached. She could feel the metal cutting into her wrists. She could feel the hate in their eyes. She could feel the hopelessness rising like cold water in her lungs. Then a new voice cut through the bidding like a blade. 200. The crowd fell silent. Every head turned. Standing at the back of the yard was a tall rancher, dressed in a worn dark coat. His hat shadowed his face, but his stance, solid, rooted, pulled every gaze toward him. His name was Rhett Harrow, though most knew him only as the loner from Harrow Ridge, the man who kept to himself, who spoke little, who rode alone. He didn't come to town often, and he never, ever came to auctions. No one dared outbid him. "One bid at 200, the auctioneer called, suddenly nervous. "Do I hear?" "No," Rhett said quietly. It wasn't loud, but it carried. The auctioneer swallowed. "Sold. To Mr. Harrow." The gavel cracked like thunder. Chains rattled. Seraphine felt the world tilt, as if a rope had snapped inside her chest. Her legs trembled, but she stayed standing. She wasn't sure whether she had been saved or simply traded. Rhett walked forward, boots stirring dust. Up close, she could see the scars along his jaw, the weariness in his gray eyes, the strength in his hands that looked like they'd rebuilt fences and buried too many things. The auctioneer fumbled with the keys. His hands shook so badly he nearly dropped them. The chains fell. The weight left her wrists, but not her spirit. Rhett didn't stare at her body. He didn't leer. He didn't touch her except to offer one steady hand. "Can you walk?" he asked. His voice was rough, but not unkind. She nodded. "Then we ride." She stepped down from the platform, her legs shaking. Men glared as she passed, some muttering curses, some spitting in the dirt. She ignored them, though her stomach twisted with fear. Rhett lifted her onto his stallion with a gentleness that didn't match his scarred face. He mounted behind her, keeping enough distance that she wouldn't feel trapped. They rode out of Dry Creek without a word. But as they disappeared into the valley, neither of them noticed the woman in a black riding coat seated beneath the shade of the saloon porch. A woman with silver hair pulled tight, eyes sharp as a hawk's. She watched Rhett and Seraphine ride away. Then she swung onto her own horse, and she rode hard toward the northern mountains. Seraphine clung to the saddle horn as Rhett's stallion carried them across wide stretches of sun-bleached prairie. 15 miles of open land stretched before them, grass rolling like waves, cattle in the distance, wind whispering across the plains. The silence was heavy, not uncomfortable, but full, like both were thinking too much to speak. She finally asked the question that had been burning her tongue. "Why did you buy me?" Rhett didn't answer at first. His ranch spread below them. Solid fences, straight lines, a stone house built with stubborn hands. A place built to last. "I didn't buy you," he said finally. "I paid to remove the chains." "That's different." She frowned, studying him. "What do you want from me?" "Work," he said. "Nothing more. And if I refuse, then you're free to walk away." He nodded toward the valley. "But it's a long way to anywhere. And there are worse things than chains out here." They rode the rest of the trail in silence. When they arrived, Rhett helped her down. Carefully, respectfully. "There's a room round back," he said. "Fresh water, clean clothes, food when you're ready." He hesitated. "My wife kept the place tidy. Passed a few years back." Seraphine looked around. Everything was clean, ordered, preserved. A home held together by grief and memories. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He nodded once. "One rule," he said quietly. "You're safe here. No one harms you. Not while I'm breathing." Her chest tightened. For the first time in months, she felt something unfamiliar. Not trust. Not yet. But the beginning of it. She slipped into the small room, closed the door, and allowed herself one long breath. She examined the folded dress he'd left for her. Simple, clean blue. And as she washed away dirt, fear, and shame, she felt the tiniest flicker of something she thought she'd lost. Hope. But through the window, something moved in the distant trees. A rider. A shadow. And tucked beneath her old dress, hidden in a leather pouch, lay a secret she'd carried for 6 long months. A secret that would bring danger to Rhett Harrow's door by the next sunrise. A secret worth killing for. She gripped the pouch, heart pounding. Tomorrow, everything would change. Dawn crept over Harrow Ridge in a slow wash of red and gold. The lights spilled across the valley like paint on rough canvas, touching the fences, the barn, the house, and finally the figure standing motionless at the kitchen window. Rhett Harrow hadn't slept. He felt something stirring in the wind all night. A warning. A shift. The same feeling he used to get before an ambush during the border wars, when the air seemed to hold its breath. He sipped his coffee, though it had long gone cold. Outside, the world looked peaceful. But peace never lasted long in this country. Behind him, soft footsteps approached. Seraphine stepped into the kitchen wearing the blue dress he'd given her. It fit better than he expected. Too well, almost as if it belonged to her. Clean skin, clean hair, and a posture that gave her back the dignity that auction had tried to steal. "You're up early," she said. "So are you." She followed his gaze through the window. "What is it?" she whispered. Rhett set the cup down. "Trouble." A thin cloud of dust rose from the far road, still distant, but unmistakable. Moving fast. More than one rider, many riders. The rumbling beneath the earth came a moment later, like the first growl of storm. Seraphine's fingers tightened around the chair back. Her breathing quickened. "You know who that is?" Rhett said quietly. It wasn't a question. She didn't answer. The dust cloud grew larger, rising higher, spreading wide. "Seraphine," Rhett said, turning to her. "Whatever's coming, tell me now." The girl swallowed hard. Her hand slipped instinctively toward the hidden pouch beneath her dress. "I didn't expect them to find me so quickly," she whispered. "Who?" But before she could speak, the thunder of hooves filled the valley. Rhett stepped onto the porch. The sight that met him made his pulse slow to a dangerous steadiness. Riders poured over the ridge. Not 3, not 5, dozens. An army. All women. The sunlight flashed across rifles, shotguns, revolvers strapped to saddles. Dust billowed around them like smoke. They didn't ride like townsfolk. They rode like soldiers. At their head was a woman with silver hair braided tight, wearing a black leather coat that snapped in the wind. She rode a black mare with the confidence of someone born in the saddle. Rhett knew the name before Seraphine even stepped beside him. "Magdalena Cross," Seraphine whispered. "The Iron Widow of the northern settlements. A legend. She'd buried a husband in the mining wars, then built a settlement with her own 2 hands. People said 40 widows had followed her, Women who'd lost everything but learned how to survive without fear. Those women now filled Rhett's yard, circling the house with a formation so tight it could have been practiced on a parade ground. Rhett didn't reach for his gun. Not yet. But his hand hovered near it, just in case. Magdalena dismounted without breaking eye contact. Harrow, Magdalena's daughter. The world tilted, and then steadied. Of course. The posture, the fight in her eyes, the way she'd carried herself even in chains. It all made sense. Magdalena stepped closer, not touching Seraphine, just standing near her like a shield. She went missing 6 months ago, Magdalene said. Wagon train vanished without a trace. We tracked the trail for weeks. Thought she was dead. Rhett kept his expression unreadable. She didn't tell me. Would you have believed her? The older woman asked. He didn't answer. Magdalena turned to him fully now, her stare sharp as a drawn knife. I'm here for one thing, Harrow. The girl. Seraphine stepped forward immediately. No, child, Magdalena began. No, Seraphine repeated, stronger this time. He saved me, protected me, didn't lay a hand on me, didn't ask for anything. I'm not leaving without telling the truth. Magdalena crossed her arms. Then tell it. Seraphine's fingers curled tight around the leather pouch beneath her dress. She looked at Rhett, and then at the 40 women watching her like hawks. Her throat worked as if swallowing fire. What happened to the wagon train, she whispered, was not an accident. Magdalena's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? Seraphine drew the pouch from beneath her dress with trembling fingers. She opened it and spilled its contents into her palm. Not coins. Gold. But gold unlike any Rhett had ever seen. Nuggets streaked with a faint green veining. Magdalena gasped. Every widow stepped forward. Even Rhett felt the air shift, because green vein gold came from only one place in the Northern Territory. The mine that had collapsed 2 years earlier. The mine 17 men died in. The mine Magdalena swore would never reopen. Seraphine's voice was barely a whisper now. The man who took me, he didn't just survive that collapse. She closed her hand around the gold. He reopened the mine, and he's coming here. The wind carried the echo of her words across the silent yard. Rhett's jaw tightened. Magdalena's eyes turned cold. And somewhere in the distance, a new dust cloud rose, smaller than the widow army, but darker. More violent. Riders. Men. Coming fast. Seraphine trembled. He'll kill anyone who tries to protect me. Rhett stepped forward, placing himself between her and the growing dust cloud. Let him come, he said. His voice was calm, but his eyes promised war. The second dust cloud darkened as it approached, rolling down from the foothills like a storm with teeth. Even before the riders came into view, the air changed, heavier, sharper, carrying the cold bite of danger. Rhett Harrow didn't move from where he stood in front of Seraphine. He didn't blink, didn't breathe, it seemed. Magdalena Cross stepped beside him, her rifle already drawn and ready. Her women shifted into formation with practiced ease, spreading out across the yard, some taking cover behind fencing, others dropping to one knee like seasoned marksmen. 40 women, 10 men. Numbers weren't the problem. The problem was the man leading them. The riders finally crested the hill, silhouettes framed by the morning sun. At their head rode a tall, scarred man on a dun horse, his long coat flapping like torn wings in the wind. Seraphine made a sound halfway between a gasp and a sob. Cain, she whispered. Jeremiah Cain. Rhett had heard the stories. Everyone had. Cain, the foreman who ignored safety warnings for more gold. Cain, the man responsible for the collapse that killed 17 miners. Cain, the coward who vanished the same night with the mine's maps, records, and stolen gold. And now he was riding straight toward them. Jeremiah, Cain reined in his horse 20 yards from the yard, his men fanning out behind him. Even at that distance, Rhett could see the puckered scars twisting half the man's face, a broken mirror of the man he once was. Well, Cain called out, his voice smooth as oil poured over gravel. Looks like a welcoming committee. He smiled, or tried to. The scar tissue pulled it into a sneer. Rhett Harrow, he said, didn't expect to see you playing guardian angel. Rhett's hand hovered near his holster. Didn't expect to see you above ground, he replied. Cain laughed, a sound like metal grinding. Takes more than a cave-in to kill me. Though I'll admit, he tapped the ruined side of his face. It did leave its mark. Magdalena stepped forward, voice sharp enough to cut bone. You're trespassing, Cain. Turn your men around. Now, why would I do that? He asked lightly, leaning in the saddle. Seems we have business to settle. His eyes slid past Rhett, landed on Seraphine. There you are, girl. Seraphine flinched. You took something of mine, Cain continued. A pouch full of gold. And I am to take it back, along with you. A low growl built in Rhett's chest. She doesn't belong to you. Actually, Cain said, reaching into his coat, she does. He held up a crumpled paper. A bill of sale. Bought her off those traders fair and square. Cost me 2 rifles, a horse, and, well, those men's lives after they served their purpose. The widow army stiffened. Cain only grinned wider. So here's my offer, he said. Give me the girl and the gold she stole, and I'll let the rest of you live. Rhett stepped forward. Magdalena stepped forward too. 40 rifles clicked in unison. Cain raised an eyebrow. Careful now, he said softly. I've got dynamite in those saddlebags. Enough to turn this pretty ranch into ashes. Seraphine's breath caught in her throat. But Rhett didn't move. Then we die standing, he said. A quiet murmur swept through the widow army. Not fear, but approval. These were women who had buried husbands, sons, fathers. Women who had faced down bandits, starvation, and storms fiercer than any man. Cain's smile faded. You're making a mistake, Harrow. No, Rhett said. I made one 3 years ago. Cain blinked. Rhett's jaw clenched. I was there, at the mine, the day it collapsed. Magdalena turned sharply toward Rhett, shock flickering in her eyes. Rhett didn't look away from Cain. I was the one who tried to stop you from opening that last tunnel. You ignored me. His voice hardened. And I was the fool who let you walk away instead of putting a bullet in your back. Cain's smile returned, feral and wicked. And look how that mercy turned out. The air grew tight, humming like a wire about to snap. Magdalena spoke next. What did you want with my daughter? Cain shrugged lazily. Oh, a bit of cooking, a bit of cleaning, he smirked. Company. Seraphine's hands balled into fists. You kept me in that cabin like a prisoner, she snapped. You killed those miners. You lied your way across the territory. Cain tilted his head. Don't forget the part where you stole from me. He nodded toward the pouch. Seraphine swallowed. Rhett glanced at her. What's in it? He asked quietly. Her shoulders trembled. Gold, she whispered. From a forbidden mine. Even the wind seemed to stop. Cain's voice lowered, dangerous. And she can lead anyone right back to the vein. That's why she's worth more alive than dead. Seraphine stepped back, shaking her head in disgust. I don't want the gold. I don't want anything from that place. Oh, please, Cain scoffed. You expect us to believe you're some kind of saint? Then he played his final card. A little bird told me you didn't exactly leave home empty-handed, he said casually. Isn't that right? Miss Cross. Magdalena stiffened. What's he talking about? She whispered. Seraphine's eyes filled with shame. I took things, she said softly. Money. Jewelry. I wanted to see the world. I thought I'd send it back later. I never meant. Cain cut her off. There it is. The truth. Not innocent. Not pure. Just a thief. Magdalena's face hardened with grief, but not rejection. Rhett watched Seraphine tremble under the weight of her confession. Then he stepped closer to her. It doesn't matter what she did before, he said. Matters what she becomes now. Cain laughed. Oh, that's rich. The loner rancher grows a conscience. But the widow army didn't laugh. They stepped closer to Seraphine, shielding her. 40 hardened women. 40 rifles. 40 hearts that had already known loss. Cain's men shifted nervously. You see, Magdalena said coldly. You've already lost. Cain's smile twisted. We'll see about that. His hand drifted toward his gun. Rhett's fingers brushed his holster. Seraphine stared, breath frozen. And the first shot hung in the air like lightning before the strike. The world moved in a single heartbeat. Cain's hand dropped toward his gun. Rhett drew. Magdalena raised her rifle. 40 women shifted into firing stance. But the bullet that split the air first came from Cain. The shot rang out sharp and vicious, kicking dust from the porch post inches from Seraphine's shoulder. She stumbled back with a cry, and that single sound snapped Rhett Harrow into something fierce and unstoppable. Rhett fired back. His bullet caught Cain high in the arm, knocking the scar man sideways in the saddle. Cain roared in pain as the wound blossomed red across his coat. Then the world erupted. Gunfire thundered across the ranch yard like a rolling storm. Rifles cracked. Pistols barked. Screams and shouts mixed with the metallic snaps of bullets ricocheting off wagon frames and troughs. Rhett shoved Seraphine behind the porch beam. "Stay low," he barked, then spun back into the open. Magdalena was already firing, every shot deliberate, measured, years of rage honed into deadly skill. Her widows fanned out like a wave, their formation precise and unbreakable. Cain's men were fast, brutal, and unhinged. But they weren't ready for 40 women who had nothing left to fear. A rifle cracked from the tree line as one widow dropped a rider clean off his horse. Another woman flipped a barrel over and used it for cover, firing twice and dropping two attackers. A gray-haired widow with a scar across her chin calmly cocked her shotgun and blasted a man off his boots. They weren't soldiers. They weren't hired guns. They were survivors. And they fought like people who had learned long ago that the world would not spare them. Cain's men scrambled for protection, surprised by the intensity of the defense. Rhett saw Cain staggering toward his horse, toward the saddlebags. The dynamite. If Cain reached it, the ranch would be nothing but ash and memory. Rhett sprinted across the yard, bullets slicing the air around him. He dove behind a water trough as gunfire peppered the wood. Then he rolled out, firing at one of Cain's men, trying to flank the porch. "Rhett!" Seraphine cried from behind him. He didn't look back. He couldn't. Cain was 10 feet from the horse now. One good grab away from an explosion that would kill every soul in the yard. "Cover him!" Magdalena roared. 3 widows opened fire, forcing Cain's remaining men to duck for cover, buying Rhett precious seconds. Rhett lunged from the trough. Cain reached the saddle. Their eyes locked. Cain yanked the flap open, fingers grazing the bundle of dynamite. Rhett fired. Cain staggered. The bullet tore through his shoulder, spinning him around. But the man didn't fall. Not yet. Not Cain. He grabbed the dynamite with a shaking hand and raised it like a trophy. "You'll burn with me," he howled. Then he drew his gun with the other hand. Time slowed. Rhett saw the madness in Cain's eyes. He saw the widows behind him, still fighting, still standing. He saw Seraphine, crouched behind the porch post, watching him with terror and trust intertwined. He thought of his wife Elena, of the miners, of the day he'd chosen mercy and lost 17 souls to it. He wouldn't make that mistake again. Rhett fired one last time. The bullet struck Cain's center mass, clean, precise, final. Cain's body jerked. The dynamite slipped from his grasp. He crumpled to the dust with a thud that seemed to echo across the valley. The dynamite rolled harmlessly away. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then one of Cain's men dropped his gun. Then another. Then a third. Within seconds, the remaining 5 were on their knees, hands up, faces pale. Silence settled over the ranch like a heavy blanket. Smoke drifted in thin white ribbons through the cooling air. Wood crackled. Horses snorted nervously. The widow army stood victorious and unbroken. Seraphine bolted from the porch. "Rhett!" She reached him just as he slumped against a fence post. His hand pressed hard against his ribcage where Cain's bullet had grazed him. "You're hit," she said, her voice tight with panic. "I've had worse," Rhett grunted, though his face had gone white. Magdalena hurried over, her rifle slung across her back. "He'll live," she said after a quick look. Cain's shot just scraped him. She glanced toward the dead foreman. "He won't be shooting anyone again." Some of the widows gave quiet nods. Approval, satisfaction, closure. They had fought demons before. Today, one more had been laid to rest. Seraphine's hands trembled as she touched Rhett's shoulder. "You could have died. Better me than you," he said simply. The words struck her like a blow. She opened her mouth, but a sharp whistle cut across the yard. One of the widows pointed toward the mountains. Smoke, thin, white, drifting from the mouth of a hidden gulch. A signal, or a warning. Seraphine's face drained of color. That's Kane's second crew, she whispered. The ones he kept deeper in the mountain camp. How many? Magdalena asked. 5, maybe 6. And they're meaner than the first group. They don't come for money. They come for revenge. Rhett exhaled slowly. Of course Kane wouldn't come alone. Magdalena's jaw tightened. How long until they get here? An hour, Seraphine said. Maybe less. Rhett wiped the blood from his side and stood straighter than he should have. Then we finish this before dark. Magdalena nodded once. 40 widows, she said. 6 killers. Her eyes gleamed. Poor odds for them. Seraphine looked between Rhett and her mother. What do we do? Rhett holstered his gun. We get ready, he said. All of us. He looked toward the mountain pass where the smoke drifted like a rising ghost. And this time, he murmured, we end it for good. The sun slid lower across the valley, painting the world in bruised gold. Long shadows stretched across Harrow Ranch, shifting with the quiet movements of the widow army. They checked rifles, loaded cartridges, took positions behind stone walls, troughs, and fence posts. This wasn't panic. This wasn't fear. This was preparation, done by women who had buried too many to ever be unprepared again. Seraphine stood near the porch, her hands clenched so tightly the knuckles had gone white. She kept looking toward the mountains, toward that thin trail of smoke curling into the sky. They won't stop, she said quietly. Rhett Harrow adjusted the bandage around his ribs, his breath hitching only slightly. No, he agreed. Men like Kane never let go. Even in death, they leave others to carry out their last cruelty. Magdalena Cross stepped onto the porch, black coat billowing in the wind. She looked every inch the Iron Mother of the Territories, jaw set, eyes sharp, hard-armored, but beating strong. You said the second crew's worse than the first, she reminded Seraphine. Tell us everything. Seraphine swallowed hard. There were 6 of them, she said. Kane kept them deeper in the gulch. Men who followed him not for gold, but because they believed him. Believed what? Rhett asked. Seraphine hesitated. That he had a claim from God to the mines. He told them the cave-in was a test of the chosen. He said the gold belonged to those willing to sacrifice anything for it. Rhett muttered a curse under his breath. Cult fools, Magdalena spat. That's even worse than hired guns. Seraphine nodded. They believe Kane will rise again in the next vein of gold. They think anyone who tries to stop them is cursed. They won't come to bargain. They won't talk. Fine, Magdalena said. Talking was never the plan. A gust of wind swept across the yard, carrying the smell of pine and dust. The kind of wind that arrives right before blood is spilled. Seraphine shivered. Rhett touched her arm gently. You're safe here, no matter what comes. Her throat tightened. I've caused enough trouble for everyone. Rhett shook his head. You didn't bring trouble. Trouble brought itself to you. We're just standing in its way. Magdalena gave a rare, grim smile. Spoken like a man who finally forgives himself. Rhett stiffened at the words, but didn't deny them. Not this time. A whistle cut across the yard. One of the widows jogged up. Riders, she said. 6 of them, moving fast through the gulch. They'll be here in 20 minutes. The women around them straightened. 20 minutes. That was all. Magdalena turned to her army. Positions. The widows moved like a single living creature, silent, coordinated, deadly. Their boots whispered across the dirt. Their guns gleamed under the fading sun. Seraphine stepped forward. I'm fighting too. No, Rhett said immediately. You've been through enough. Magdalena gave Seraphine a long, steady look. You know these men. You know how they think, how they move, where they strike first. Seraphine nodded. They'll come for the porch first. Kane always said the house is the heart. Kill the heart, and everything else stops fighting. Rhett frowned. That's why you're not staying here. He grabbed Seraphine's hand and guided her to the back of the house, toward a small storage cellar built into the hillside. The entrance was half hidden by brush. You go down there, he said. You stay quiet, no matter what happens. Seraphine pulled away. I'm not hiding while people die for me. Rhett stepped closer, his voice low and steady. It's not hiding. It's surviving. And surviving is the bravest thing you can do in a world like this. Her eyes glistened with hot, painful tears. Rhett, he brushed a stray hair from her cheek with a gentleness that almost broke her. I lost Elena because I couldn't protect her. I won't lose you too. Seraphine froze. Not at the words, at the way he said them. As a protector, as someone who cared, not for what she was, but who she had become. She bowed her head. All right, she whispered. But you promised you'll come back? His voice softened. I always keep my word. She stepped into the cellar. He closed the wooden door and rolled a heavy wagon wheel in front of it, a hidden shield of wood and iron. From inside, she whispered a prayer she hadn't spoken since childhood. Please let them live. Rhett turned and walked back toward the yard. Magdalena was waiting. She's safe? The Iron Mother asked. For now, he said. Good, Magdalena replied. Because here they come. The second dust cloud thundered down the gulch. 6 riders in dark coats, screaming war cries that echoed off the hills like ghosts set loose. The widows lifted their rifles in a single wave. Rhett took his place beside Magdalena. One last fight, Harrow, she said softly. Make it count. He nodded. Let's finish what Cain started. The riders broke from the gulch mouth and charged the ranch. Gunfire erupted again, sharper, louder, deadlier. Bullets tore through the air. Horses reared. Dirt exploded in violent sprays. These men weren't like Cain's first group. They didn't dodge. They didn't take cover. They rode straight through the bullets, screaming like zealots who believed pain was holy. One widow fell back with a shoulder wound. Another ducked as a bullet cracked inches above her hat. Magdalena fired, dropping one rider clean off his horse. Rhett dropped another, but the remaining 4 pressed on, closing the distance at terrifying speed. Rhett braced himself. We hold the line. Magdalena cocked her rifle. For every woman they ever broke. The riders roared. The widows fired again. And the battle that followed would be spoken of in frontier towns for generations, where 40 women held back men who had no fear of death, and a loner rancher stood at their center like a wall of iron. As one rider leaped from his saddle toward the porch with a raised knife, a figure exploded from the cellar door behind them. Seraphine crossed, and she held something in her hand that would change the entire fight. Seraphine burst from the hidden cellar like a spark thrown into dry grass, breathless, wild-eyed, and holding something the dying light caught in a flash of steel. Not a gun, not a knife. Blasting capitul. Small, silver, deadly. The fused trail behind it like a snake waiting to strike. Rhett's heart lurched. Seraphine, no. But she ran forward anyway, boots pounding across the dirt, her blue dress whipping behind her like a flag of defiance. The world narrowed to her alone, her breath loud in her ears, her ribs aching, the ground shaking from charging horses. The 4 riders were almost at the porch. Too close, too fast, too unstoppable. Unless someone stopped them. Magdalena shouted, fall back, fall back. The widows ducked behind troughs and posts. Rhett vaulted over a fence rail, trying to reach Seraphine before she reached the riders. But she was already too far ahead. A rider swung down from his horse, knife gleaming, eyes mad with fanatic hunger. He lunged for her. Seraphine dove sideways, rolled through dirt and dust, and slammed the blasting cap into the dry ground. The sharp click echoed like a trigger pulled on God's own judgment. Then a flash, a scream, a deafening boom. The ground erupted in a geyser of dirt and fire, throwing all 4 riders backward in a violent burst. Horses reared and bolted. Men flew like broken branches in a storm. The shockwave knocked Seraphine clear off her feet. Rhett caught her before she hit the ground. He dragged her behind the trough, shielding her with his own body as rocks and soil rained down. When the dust finally settled, the attackers lay sprawled across the yard, alive, barely, stunned, and disarmed. Their weapons scattered, their nerves shattered. Magdalena strode forward and put a boot on the nearest man's wrist. You picked the wrong ranch. Shots clicked into chambers as 40 widows formed a tight ring around the defeated men. These killers had expected an easy victory, an offering for their dead leader. Instead, they had run headfirst into the wrath of women who'd lost too much to lose again. Rhett lifted Seraphine gently, brushing dust from her hair. "What were you thinking?" he rasped, voice breaking. "You could have been killed." Her voice trembled. "I wasn't hiding while you died. Not again. Not ever." Rhett stared at her. This girl who had once stood shaking on an auction block, who now stood like a storm-born warrior, dirt-smudged and fearless. "You saved us," he said softly. "No," Seraphine whispered, leaning into him. "We saved each other." Magdalena approached, rifle slung over her shoulder, jaw hard, but her eyes softer than before. "You're stronger than I ever realized," she told her daughter. "You've got more of me in you than I thought." Seraphine smiled faintly. "I hope so." Behind them, widows tied the survivors' hands, ignoring curses and wild muttering about Cain rising again. Magdalena dismissed it with a flick of her wrist. "Take them to the territorial marshal at first light. Let the law deal with what's left." When the last man was secured, Magdalena turned to Rhett. "You're bleeding through that bandage," she said. Rhett touched his side, winced, and tried to pretend he wasn't hurting. "I'll manage." Magdalena snorted. "You're tough, Harrow." "Stupid but tough." Then she looked at Seraphine. "You staying with him?" Seraphine glanced at Rhett. He waited, silent, steady, not pushing her, not claiming her, simply standing as the man who risked everything because it was right. "I ran away from my life," Seraphine said, "and I thought I'd be ashamed forever. But out here with him, I learned who I really am." She touched her mother's hand. "I want to build something real, something honest, something earned." Magdalena nodded slowly. "Then you have my blessing." Rhett blinked. "You're what now?" Magdalena smirked. "You saved my daughter, helped her find her spine, and you killed the man who destroyed half of this territory's peace. That earns you something." She glanced around. "All widows. Pack up." The 40 women mounted their horses with the discipline of an army. Before riding out, Magdalena reached into her saddlebag. "Here," she said, tossing something to Rhett. He caught it. A small cloth bag. Heavy. Gold. He froze. Magdalena shook her head. "Not for greed. For rebuilding. You need a new barn wall, new fencing, and, well, a new porch." Rhett opened the bag slightly. "Not gold. Seeds. Wheat. Corn. Beans. Life. Build a future," Magdalena said. "Not a grave." She squeezed Seraphine's shoulder, mounted her horse, and called to her women. "Let's ride." 40 widows thundered away into the rising dusk, boots striking the dirt like a heartbeat fading into the hills. Silence returned. Gentle, warm, earned. Seraphine looked up at Rhett. "You still hurting?" He shrugged. "Only when I breathe." She smiled softly. "Then I guess we'll breathe together." His chest tightened, not with pain, but with something he thought he'd buried 3 years ago with Elena. Hope. A new kind. They walked back to the porch, the battered, bullet-scarred porch, and sat as the sun dropped behind the mountains. Seraphine leaned against him. Rhett rested his hand over hers. And for the first time in years, the ranch felt like home again. Not because it was quiet, not because the danger had passed, but because someone else's heartbeat echoed beside his. Because 2 lives, broken, wandering, lost, had found a place to begin again. Seraphine looked out over the valley. "What happens now?" Rhett squeezed her hand. "Now," he whispered, "we build something worth keeping." The wind stirred across the empty yard, carrying away the last cinders of violence, and carrying in the scent of a future neither of them could have imagined. The kind built not on gold, not on fear, but on choice. 2 souls choosing each other, choosing courage, choosing tomorrow. And in the fading light of the frontier, that was worth more than any mine ever dug from the earth. If you felt this tale in your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Wild West Emotional Tales, where every story rides through the dust, the danger, and the kind of love that never dies. See you in the next tale, partner.